We're talking about fantasy football defense. Yes, defense is important. Sean and David G on the mic today. Fantasy Football Almanac show. How you doing, Dave?
I'm excellent, man. I'm ready to talk some defense and some kickers too, right?
Yeah, we're going to talk a little kicker action, and I want to talk...
wait. That was the joke.
Oh, are we? I'll talk kickers. I don't care.
I'll give you. Here's my kicker stance for the NFL season. All right. Don't take one until your last pick. There you go.
Oh, I disagree. Kicker. We're gonna have a debate on that.
All right. I guess we are talking kickers.
Yeah. We'll talk about it. We won't. A little bit. Draft tactics. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Before we get all that, so listen. I was scouring, Bovada Sportsbook. And I'm looking at, different odds because, I'm just getting ready for the NFL season. It occurred to me today, prop bets is over under is Christian McCaffrey going to have more than 100 yards rushing, or, over under is Patrick Mahomes going to have more than 350 yards passing, yes or no? And those are the bets. And I'm wondering why a sportsbook hasn't further embraced fantasy football and say, standard scoring, maybe partner with, Bovada partners with somebody or whoever it is, right? Partner with one of these things and say over under, are they going to exceed X amount of fantasy points, or head-to-head battles? Who has more fantasy points, this person or this person? I cannot believe that hasn't happened yet. I would be all over that.
That's a really good idea. That sounds like the future to me, betting on head-to-head battles. It's inevitable at this point. Right?
It is inevitable, right?
Growing, man.
I could imagine if Bovada and ESPN, if ESPN had some kind of API and it was or NFL.com or whoever, and feeds that in and say, hey, we're using this scoring. Here are the scoring methods. Who has more fantasy points, Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson? You could do futures the entire season. You could do week to week, head to head stuff, and that's exactly how prop bet works. But I think you would introduce people people like us, fantasy football players. Now, I've been a bettor for, close to a freaking decade now. I've been a degenerate for a long time. But, people that are kind of toeing the water, I don't know how to bet. I don't know, spreads, who should I take? But you introduce fantasy football head-to-heads there, Christian McCaffrey versus Saquon Barkley in their matchup. People will bet that, man. That's I'm giving away free money to the first freaking casino. Bovada, are you listening? Are you listening to us right now, dude? That is such a moneymaker for these people that I'm actually I'm probably going to send an email today and see if I can get a job. Get a job with them.
It is, and I think that's a great point because that's got to be the target audience. Fantasy football players, we're already gambling. We're already hooked. Yeah. We're already in. We want to gamble. Just give us more of it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's I don't know, man. You're right. It's the future, especially now with legalized gambling across the country. How big, I think fantasy football last I saw was a $4 billion industry. It might be higher now. I'm sure it is, frankly.
It's going up every year.
It's I saw an estimate. I think there are 360 million people in the United States, and over 100 million play fantasy football. It's giant. It's just a giant industry now, which is why shows like this exist, frankly. So, so we're going to talk about defense and special teams. We'll talk a little draft tactics, just because I've been in mock draft. I've been doing 2 or 3 mock drafts a day at this point. And the Calibrate, by the way, Fantasy Football Almanac Draft Guide still available. Still time for you to buy the book, get the book in time for your fantasy drafts. It's updated as of August 20th. So it's the most up to date thing you're going to find. Period. And you get free updates. I'm probably going to push out another update this week. So definitely check that out. Show notes below. But I've been doing the mock drafts. I feel pretty good about things. Let me hit you before we talk about defense. So my all-time favorite league, a pride league, no money or anything like that. It was a deep keeper, keep 10 people year to year. All of the owners just kind of came back this year, probably because of COVID. Everybody's bored, and they're like, hey, let's get that league going back again. So my draft is actually tonight. And I randomized the draft order for the first year and all that. I ended up with the 4th pick. And I thought that was the ultimate sister kiss. I did not want the 4th pick because, then I'm well, I don't know. Do I pull the trigger on Dalvin? I love Dalvin this year, as I've been talking about. But, I'm in a dynasty. Do I really want a Dalvin Cook in a dynasty? And he's got the contract situation. I know he's back with Minnesota, but is he going to be there long term? And so I'm looking at all this, and I was doing these mock drafts. I decided to trade back straight up. I now have the 8th pick. What do you think about that move? Was it bold?
Well, I had my first dynasty draft ever this year,
and
I traded up, and I regretted it almost instantly. I traded up into the first round. I traded my 2nd and 3rd round pick for an additional first, and I got a 7th rounder back. And about a day later, I realized that is basically the ultimate rookie move, is trading up in your dynasty draft to go get those. Don't do it, all right? Let me tell you from my one experience, don't do it. You're going to be so much more comfortable trading back, getting rid of like you did. I would have rather gotten rid of my first round pick and had 2 seconds, 2/3, just because when you're talking dynasty, you want to look ahead. You want to have a lot of that close to top end talent, but not maybe elite.
Right.
You want the elite talent, obviously.
Right.
But if you can have elite talent and then your other keepers are crap, or you can have 6, 7 really good keepers, I think you're better off going a little bit towards the depth route there.
Is your dynasty league, is it full? Is
Yes,
it full dynasty? Okay.
dynasty.
So like you're basically your draft year to year is going to be rookie draft then.
Yes.
Okay, that's cool. I like that format a lot. For me, like I like the dynasty format. I like deep keeper. So we used to keep 10 year to year. I think when we reactivated, we kept 8. But we also used to play IDP. And I don't like individual defensive player anymore. For me, like I'm at a stage in my life where I just don't want to monitor, Chase Young's effect. I want. So we slimmed down the rosters and we only have 8 keepers basically year to year, and it kind of keeps the waiver wire a little bit more fresh. We have different rules and all that as every fantasy league does. And one of the things I did too is I did, instead of 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, we do 1 running back, 1 wide receiver, 3 flex. So it kind of dilutes the pool and it lets you have a lot of different paths to victory, which again, that was kind of one of the old staples. But to your point, my brother won like the first 4 championships in that dynasty league because he traded out of the first round and got, he had 2 seconds and 2/3. And I mean, the first 4 championships, and he dominated year to year. What I did, my rookie move in that draft is like, an 18 or 19-year-old or whatever I was. I ended up saying, okay, I'm going to play the long game. I'm going to sacrifice year 1, and I'm going to just go all in with young guys. But what I ended up doing was I drafted young, but I overdrafted them. When I could have had like a lot of starts and youth, I ended up just having just youth. So it took me about 2 or 3 years to really, and I projected well, but I gave away those first like 2 to 3 years and I didn't have to. So this year, trading back, what I have now is, it's a 10-team league, I now have the 8th and the 13th pick. And in my mock drafts, like, I think what I'm going to be able to find, and I have a couple Cleveland Brown fans, so I don't know, but I think I'm going to overdraft Nick Chubb because I love him in future. I know Kareem Hunt, we talked about Chubb, though, on this show. I think I can get Chubb. If this were like another league, I would wait on Chubb and just cross my fingers I could get him at 13. In this league, if I want him, and I do want him, I'll have to go 8, and it's to the point where I don't even know if I'm going to get him at 8. But I think I'll get either Chubb or Derrick Henry, who I like. I know you're a little bit more down on this year. And then in the second pick, I'm going to have a guy like Eckler, Aaron Jones, or Josh Jacobs falling to me in that second pick. I like that. And then my wide receivers in that 3rd to 4th round, for me, are interchangeable. Like, I know I'm going to miss Godwin, who's kind of the last guy that I would take up that high. So I was doing these mocks and just like, you know what? I'm comfortable in the middle. I'm comfortable in the late rounds, but I don't want to have to risk overdrafting a wide receiver or running back I don't like at the back half of the round. So that's why I moved up, man.
Yeah, especially if you want to start 2 running back, you want to be in that back half of the first round. I actually like Derrick Henry more than Chubb. Especially in redraft and dynasty, it's a little closer. But in redraft, it's not even close for me. If I want to win this year, I like Derrick Henry a lot more.
I actually agree with you. I think Derrick Henry it's not in my published books, but my analytics, I think, has Derrick Henry at like 4th at running back. I don't have those because those aren't the published numbers. But like if you have the book and you're looking at points above replacement and all that stuff, I think he's like 3rd or 4th. Yeah. And I agree, but I have Chubb just behind him. So, I mean, shoot, if Derrick Henry's sitting there, I have a feeling because we're in a dynasty and I know this league, they might go like Mahomes and Lamar Jackson in the first round. I might be able to – there's an outside chance, David. There's an outside chance I could get Chubb and Henry. Because if Henry's sitting there at 8, I'm going to take Henry.
Is it half PPR or full PPR?
Half PPR.
Okay, that's fair. I was going to say in full PPR, that's a lot of power backs, right?
Yeah, I know, but I'm talking about league dynamics and just knowing how these guys draft from previous experience.
I like it in half PPR.
I don't think it's likely. Look, I mean that's the dream scenario. I don't think the dream's happening. Ultimately, what I would love is Chubb and either Aaron Jones or Josh Jacobs. That's kind of what I'm hoping for because I like youth, obviously, right? I want the young, good running backs. But I'd be happy with a combination. If Eckler's there, if Drake's there, I'll take those guys, whatever. But I don't think they will be. All right, man. Let's talk about defense before we start picking over the the kicker argument because of these mock drafts. I'm gonna tell you why. I'm gonna give you my reasoning why. But let's go over to defense. So why don't you tell me? Let me lead off with this because I was just recording with Brad on Get Paid, and I'm looking at the top of the draft and these mock drafts. I end up taking like a defense around 11 or 12 again for the same kicker thing. We'll get to that. I know that's early, but I'll tell you why I do it. And I'm in these mock drafts. I keep looking at San Francisco and I keep looking at Pittsburgh. And the thing about Pittsburgh is for years, they've been an underrated defense. I've been able to get them undrafted for the last 2 or 3 years. And they've always been a top 5 defense in my book. Pittsburgh right now, Bovada has at plus 2,200 to win the Super Bowl, right? And San Francisco, what do they have at? San Francisco obviously is higher. They're at plus 900, haven't been kind of the champion there. And so they're well thought of. But I'm thinking like between the two of them, I really am going back and forth about which ones I like. Do you like, right now, top defense? Who is your top defense at this point going into the draft?
That's a great lead-in because I want to first address the early defensive drafters because it seems like there's one in every league. You said that might be you. You might be that guy. There's one in every league, somebody who reaches on the top defense every year just because they want that advantage, right? This year, there's no top defense. Like every year it seems like it was Chicago last year, the year before. There's always seems to be that one defense that people kind of reach on every year. And this year, you mentioned San Fran and Pittsburgh. I think there's 3 at the top. So I don't want to reach on any one of those 3. I'd rather let those 2 go off and then try and get that third one because I think they're on the same tier. And that third one for me, maybe I'm a homer, maybe I'm not. It's the Baltimore Ravens. They're one of my top defenses every year. Last year was a little bit of a step back, but I could see that going into the year, and most of us could see that going into the year, losing Terrell Suggs, losing C.J. Mosley. We knew that front 7 was just not really going to be the same. Then you talk about this year. They bolstered their weakest positions, and it's that front 7. We bring in Calais Campbell, who is just a behemoth of a man. We bring in Derek Wolfe, who's another good defensive lineman who's basically upgrades our starting unit. We still have Brandon Williams on the team. That front 7, we bring in what's his name? Patrick Queen from the draft.
Oh, yeah, that was a great pick, dude. Great pick.
Earl Thomas, I don't think the Earl Thomas cutting is really that bad, to be honest. He didn't play very well last year.
They ended up cutting? I missed that. I saw that he got in the fight. They cut him.
They cut him yesterday, if not 2 days ago.
Wow.
Our secondary is very good. We're going to be playing from ahead. Marlon Humphrey on one side. On the other side, you got Jimmy Smith, 2 safeties, Chuck Clark. I think we're balanced on all 3 levels. We have that mentality, the defensive coordinator. They're my number 1 defense this year. I have Baltimore above Pittsburgh and above San Francisco.
So Baltimore, for the bettors out there, Baltimore is at plus 650 according to Bovada to win the Super Bowl. And again, for good reason. I think the leader, of the pack is Kansas City at plus 600. Baltimore's right behind them, which is what I would do as well. Baltimore, I love Baltimore. And I said, like last year, I was higher on them too. And I know they had some questions and some losses. And I said, look, when I bet and when I lost I see nose and above, David, if you could adjust your camera again.
Whoops.
Sorry,
I was
no worries. So the Ravens, like I always talk about this when betting, and I talk about this in fantasy sports. I say there are programs, quote unquote programs. Next man up, like you lose some stars, and they never seem to get bad, right? But when they add stars, they go next level. In Baltimore last year, going into the season, I said, look, they're going to have one of the best special teams and one of the best defenses. And I thought Lamar Jackson was going to be good. Certainly didn't think he was going to be what he was. I thought, like, I accurately predicted the running. I did not think that he was going to get, 35 touchdowns or something like that throwing. I did not see that happening, but, I mean, great for him, great for them. I like Baltimore. And they are, I think, for me, they're number 3 right now. And possibly number 2, I think where I'm leaning, honestly, it's Pittsburgh. And the reason why is because I know Pittsburgh, we talk about program defenses, the 2 things I can always count on from Pittsburgh is interceptions and sacks. And for me, that's what I'm looking for in team defense, man. Those 2 things, if they give up a little bit of points every now and then, I'm okay with it. I don't love it, but I'm okay with it. But they always get sacks. They always get interceptions. Baltimore is a team that I don't think they give you as much in those categories, but they make up for it because they just play such good defense, and they keep the teams out of the end zone. So those three teams, I have no problem. I know a lot of people are betting Buffalo. I think they're going to be a top 5 defense, but for me...
Let me talk about Pittsburgh real quick, too, to cut in, because you said they might be your number 1. A huge selling point for putting them number 1 would be their playoff schedule. And if you include Week 13, too, if you need to get into the playoffs, they face the Redskins, the Bills, the Bengals, and the Colts. I mean, Redskins, that ain't good. Buffalo, Josh Allen, he's probably going to turn the ball over once or twice. Cincinnati, rookie quarterback, and then Indianapolis, could be a good offense. It's kind of an unknown. So they have what looks like a really good finishing schedule.
Yeah, and I think Indianapolis will be good, but what does Rivers do? He will put the ball up, right? So again, you're talking about, and he's a statue of a quarterback. So I like Indy's offensive line, but even then, you're still probably in line for some sacks and some interceptions. So I like those.
And that's Week 16 too. So you look at the other matchups. If you can get to Week 16, a lot of leagues pay out that second place. So you've already made it if you got to Week 16.
Yeah. So back to your original, and I guess we can talk a little bit about kicker there as well, because it's kind of the same argument. So we may as well have that conversation. So you mentioned the early defense, and you don't see like you see a top tier, and you can get them later. And then kicker, kicker's always a crapshoot, and I know that. But for me, it's Tucker and Butker, and if I can't get them, then I wait to the last round or whatever.
Greg the Leg.
Greg, with Dallas,
I think Will Lutz is another guy who's basically comes off the board as like the last kicker who you can draft and know you're going to keep on your team for the whole year.
Yeah, right.
And after that, it's kind of like, is this going to be on my team after Week 1? Who knows?
I'll give you one more. A guy that I know that you can have with the last pick of your draft, Matt Gay from Tampa Bay, assuming he ends up winning and keeping that job, just because I think Tampa Bay's offense is going to be strong enough to put them in field goal position and kicking extra points. So, and again, I'm just throwing his name out there because he's an unheralded guy that people don't think of because, but like, who wants Tampa Bay's kicker? Well, this year I do. But the reason I like drafting these guys, specifically wise, because I've been working the mock draft angle for a long time, and for the last 2 weeks, doing 2 to 3 day, charting different pick scenarios and all that. And what I'm seeing with my draft board is that when I get to round 11 or 12, assuming I have my quarterback and tight end, which hasn't always happened, but assuming I have those positions set, who I like as my flyer running backs and my flyer wide receivers, literally I can get in the last round. So what I'm faced with is, do I take this running back that I know I can get 4 picks later, or do I pick San Francisco or Pittsburgh, who is my favorite defense, who I think is going to be a season-long defense? I don't have to worry about streaming. I have that pick set, and I know I'm going to get them later. And so that's why like my back 3 receivers, we talked about this, my backup tight end, my backup quarterback, I'm generally getting those guys in a 16-pick league. I'm generally getting those guys 14, 15, 16. And I can tell you exactly what I'm doing is I'm going I'm going Tannehill in 14, and I'm getting him every time, because I don't think the back half of last season was a fluke, so I like Tannehill as a backup quarterback. I'm getting James Washington of Pittsburgh, who my analytics love. I don't know if I'm sold on him, but my analytics that I do for the book are screaming at me that he's like a top 50 pick, and I know I can get him late, so I pick him up in round 15 as my flyer, and then in round 16 I pick Jack Doyle or Greg Olsen as my backup tight end. And so knowing that, and I always get those guys, knowing that, I'm just like, well, screw it. I'll start the run on these guys and at least get the ones I want. And so that's it. I'm not saying like kicker gives you that much value. I'm saying like if you know kind of who your flyer picks are and you know where they're going, then start the run. Don't be on the end of it, And if I don't get any of those guys, I don't care. That's the other thing too. I don't care. So that's why I'm a more of a start the run guy. But what do you think about that? There's a lot of verbal diarrhea for you.
Well, if it's one of the top 4 kickers, like you said, someone you can see being on your roster the entire season, and you're not particular about which late round target you want at running back, why not? Sure, go ahead. For me, I feel like I kind of fall in love with my late round targets a little bit more. Like, I want that guy, and I don't want to risk him getting picked before my last pick. And then I just look at kicker, and it's just I'd rather reach on defense than kicker, because I feel like every year we kind of have these unknown kickers just even on bad offenses just show up and be top options. Look at last year. Zane Gonzalez was the number 5 kicker. Josh Lambo was the number 6 kicker.
Yeah, right.
Who the heck saw that? You can pick them up off the waiver wire. You can figure out kicker production as you go. And it's hard to predict it in the draft other than those, like you said, top 4 options. So unless I'm getting a top kicker, I'm waiting until my last pick, probably 100 times out of 100.
Yeah, and because I'm like always the one guy in the league, and people always laugh at me, but I've actually won leagues before because like I had Greg the Leg in his really good season, and I paired him with a defense. I can't remember what defense I had, probably Pittsburgh, and I draft like some guys a little bit early, and it just gives me competitive advantage. But you're right. I mean, the volatility, especially at kicker, is so strong that if I'm not getting Butker or Tucker, I'm not drafting a kicker until the last pick. Like I'll splurge on those 2 guys specifically because I'm a believer that even if they have a bad year, they're going to be a top 10 kicker and I don't have to worry about it. Defense, if I miss out, let's swing it back to defense. By the way, you mentioned Josh Lambo. Jacksonville is at plus 20,000 to win the Super Bowl, and great odds. I'm not sniffing that payout. My goodness, but DJ Chark, by the way, going in the 5th round consistently in these mock drafts. I love that pick. So back to defense. Okay, so we mentioned San Francisco, we mentioned Pittsburgh, we mentioned Baltimore. I kind of touched on Buffalo there. Interesting to me, the New England Patriots right now, their average draft position is 5th. They've lost like half of their defense to free agency, and then the other half to COVID opt out. Like I love Bill Belichick. One of my many rules in gambling is I don't bet against Bill Belichick, so I'm not going to bet against him. But I'm not drafting New England 5th. How do you feel about that?
I'm torn on New England because you're right. They lost so many pieces, but they did maintain some of their more important pieces, which is Stephon Gilmore. You talk about the McCourty brothers. Like they have those cornerstone pieces. They just kind of lost some of the middle guys like Van Noy. Jamie Collins plays great in New England. Might not be that great when he leaves. But they still have a lot of the big pieces. And last year, they weren't just the best defense in the league. They were winning you games as the best defense in the league. They averaged, according to Fantasy Pros, 14.8 fantasy points per game. Second place was the Steelers at 10.8. That's a 4-point weekly advantage for the number 1 defense. So you talk about the regression. They're going to regress. They're not going to be that same dominating unit they were last year.
I mean, they were scoring with regularity. Yeah, that's rare. You see that once every 10 years.
And how much of it is Kyle Van Noy a great player? Is Jamie these coaches are making these players, they're putting them in position to play great. They're putting them in position to make these plays. So I don't know if it's going to be as big of a drop up as we think. You take off 4 points a game, they're still the number 1 defense. As the 5th overall, I think that's exactly where I have them ranked. I have Baltimore, San Fran, Pittsburgh, and then I have Buffalo ahead of New England, and then I have New England as my 5th ranked defense.
Yeah, I mean, our top 3 it seems are interchangeable, and I do have Buffalo, so it actually sounds like our top 4. New England's just the first one that gives me pause, and I'm looking at the other defenses here. New England, by the way, Bovada has a plus 1,200 to win the Super Bowl, so Bovada's not sleeping on New England. And again, I'm not sleeping on him either. I don't bet against New England ever. It's my rule. But over time, I think New England covers like 60%, and when they're the underdog, they cover like 80-85%. So no, I'm not going to put my money down on that. Mathematically, you're going to lose money on that. But I'm looking at these other teams, and I can't really make a strong argument to put anybody above New England. But I think going back to kind of our previous conversation there, you're talking about draft tactics. When do you take them? If somebody drafts early, they draft the 49ers, they draft the Steelers, they draft the Ravens, before I get to it, if somebody's a little bit more overzealous than I am, I'm not drafting the Bills early. I might wait until maybe around 14 in a 16-round draft and try to get on the earlier wave of the second wave, but I'm waiting until the last round at that point, or second to last, depending on what I do with kickers. So I don't know. Maybe let me give you an argument here. The 9th rated in terms of Fantasy Pros, the 9th average draft position, who I think they're going to have a rebound year, the Chicago Bears. They still have Khalil Mack, but here's my thought on them is, we know how it is in fantasy sports. If we see a bad season last season, we're like, screw these guys. They screwed me last year. I'm not going to think about them again. But Chicago, I was down on them coming into the season because they lost Fangio to Denver as the head coach there. you get in a guy. I know the defensive coordinator there is strong. I know he has spent some time at Baltimore, the head coach in Pagano, the head coach in Indianapolis. When you install a new system, even if it's similar concepts, you're going to take a step back. So I was fully expecting Chicago to take a step back last year. This year, I think they're going to take a step forward. And now you can get a team that should be a top 10 defense. You're talking about average draft position, potentially undrafted, based on last year's performance. I think they could step up and be in the top 5. I wouldn't bet on it, but they could. What do you think about them?
So they do have great upside, and you talked about they were the number 1 defense 2 years ago. But I still am taking New England above Chicago, and here's why. Mm-hmm. You look at last year, what happened? The Patriots' offense, it took a step back. What happened? The defense wasn't affected by it. They were still playing at a high level. Chicago, when their offense took a step back last year and underperformed, it sabotaged the defense. The defense could not hold that team together like New England's defense was able to. They finished as the 20th ranked defense last year.
Ouch.
Not good. And you talk about this year, is the offense going to improve? Maybe. Nick Foles might be an upgrade over Mitchell Trubisky.
Yeah.
The one lineman they signed, I think it was Jermaine Ifedi. I mean, I don't even remember. Maybe that upgrades the offensive line. You talk about bringing in Bill Lazor. Maybe that upgrades the play calling. Bill Lazor was in Cincinnati last year. They didn't do very good. So that doesn't give you a whole lot of reason for optimism.
Right.
So I don't know if that offense is going to be good enough to not sabotage that defense. Where you talk about New England, their offense was terrible last year too. The defense still performed well. This year, is their offense going to improve? I don't know about that. But might it be a better offensive fit to support that defense? You talk about last year, they were more reliant on that short passing game, trying to get Brady. It just wasn't working. This year, they could be more reliant on that run game. They got Cam Newton. We might see a little bit more read option that might equate to having a higher time of possession if they're calling more running plays. The clock isn't stopping due to incompletions. So that could benefit the defense. And we could talk about that defense again being a top 5 option. So if I'm going after those top 4, top 5, I'd rather take the chance on New England maintaining that level of defensive play than take a chance on Chicago bouncing back from what was frankly a not good year defensively for them last year.
Fair points. And I guess we touched on this at the beginning, is you look at San Francisco, Baltimore, the point that I made was programs, right? Belichick has programs. What Belichick does, I think, better than any coach in the league is they draft for role. They don't necessarily, they marry the role in their defense to the talent. And so they don't say, here's a 6'7" defensive end who runs a 4.40 genetic freak. Let's get him. He's thinking, how am I going to use this player? Is he, smart enough to run my system, all that stuff. And I think that, and this is what Baltimore has. This is what Pittsburgh has. Maybe not to that level of, employing role and all that. But what I think we saw in Chicago last year is they didn't have depth. When the offense gets bad, the defense is on the field for longer. So maybe you can stay close for a half, but then you're gassed in the second half and you get gouged and you give up points and big plays and all that stuff. And that's the concern. Let me throw you, let me shift this over. Let me throw 2 defenses that I thought were improving towards the end of last year, and they could build on that improvement in 2020 in Kansas City and Indianapolis. I think they're, at this point, to me, we're talking about stream category. If you wind up with them in the draft, you're probably waving in them and playing the matchup a little bit. But these are teams that I could think find their way into the top 10 this year by the end of the season. Kansas City started catching fire towards the end of the year, but remember, they had Spagnuolo, their first-year defensive coordinator last year. So I think things will get better. Indianapolis, I think they're just adding pieces. What do you think about those 2 teams?
So that's a great intro, because I want to talk a little bit now that we're getting into these defenses outside of the top 7. I posted a poll on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, and I said, give me a defense not named San Fran, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, New England, New Orleans, or Chicago. That's going to surprise some people this year. I got 130 comments, right? So Indianapolis, they were one of those top people's defenses, right? So here are the results of the defense that were named. Out of 130 votes, Tampa Bay, 18 votes. Chargers, 16 votes. Indianapolis, 16. Philadelphia and Washington actually had 11 votes. Tennessee and Miami, 9. Kansas City, 8. Denver, 7. Cleveland, 5. Green Bay and Dallas had 4 votes. Atlanta had 3 votes. I might just have a few Atlanta fans following me on Twitter. The Cardinals and the Jets, too, and then 1 vote apiece for Carolina, Seattle, Jacksonville, Rams, and Minnesota. I don't really care about any of those defenses, but the ones who got at least 8 votes, Kansas City, Miami, Tennessee, Washington, Philadelphia, Colts, the Chargers, and the Buccaneers. So I do like the Colts. I had them written down as one of the defense that I think is really going to provide a lot of value early in the season. And especially in leagues where only 16 make the playoffs, you're a little bit more worried about getting those wins early in the season. Right. Indianapolis, they start off the year against Jacksonville, Minnesota, the Jets, the Bears, the Browns, and the Bengals. So
that's nice.
They have a sweet start. You talk about the DeForest Buckner trade. They have him. They have Darius Leonard, who's just a stud at the linebacker spot. Their secondary, not as great. It's probably their weak spot. They still have Malik Hooper. He's been injured, but he's a good safety. So I think they have talent on all 3 levels, and they have the schedule to really match up with it as well.
Yeah, Indianapolis, Bovada, by the way, has at plus. Sorry, I just lost it. Plus 2,000. So they're one of my interesting bets of the season in terms of just value for futures, because I like what Philip Rivers does. Remember, Philip Rivers and Frank Reich. I just always like to remind people they've had years together as a coach and quarterback. So it's not like Philip Rivers is coming in blind to the system and all that. So I do like it. But Indianapolis, for all those reasons, I like it. Kansas City, they were a startable defense towards the end of last season, so I like them. Another team, though, that kind of...
Let me jump in real quick before you keep going, because I just want to talk about their rankings from last year. Last year, Indianapolis was the 14th ranked defense according to Fantasy Pros. The Chiefs were the 8th ranked defense according to Fantasy Pros. Colts I probably like a little bit better, even though they were ranked lower last year, just because, again, I like talking about how the offense affects them. That offense just was depleted with injuries last year. It's putting a lot of weight on the defensive shoulders. And then this year you talk about bringing in Rivers, bringing in Jonathan Taylor. They're going to be a better team. They're going to be winning more. They're going to be possessing the ball more on offense. I really like that game script. And I like the Chiefs because they have that game script factor. But my one kind of troublesome part with the Chiefs is that I think a lot of it might have had to do with that home field advantage. When they're playing in Kansas City and from ahead, that is a tough place for opposing offenses to play. They don't have that home field advantage this year. There aren't going to be fans in the stadium to give them that.
Right.
So I'm not sure the Chiefs actually have enough. I do like Chris Jones. I like Tyrann Mathieu. I'm not sure they have a whole lot of playmakers on the defensive side of the ball other than those 2 players. So I'd probably rather take a chance on the Colts than the Chiefs.
Yeah. So you mentioned the start of the season, and I'm going to give you an end of the season team that I saw also in the top 10. And I want to work my way back to the Washington quote unquote football team too, because they're very. I know it's
take a little.
I know I'm trying not to call the Raiders the Oakland Raiders, man. It's the team name, and I grew up a football team fan, so it's super hard for me. But I want to talk about them in a bit because they are super intriguing right now. But a team in the top 10 who I think are actually going to snakebite their owners early in the season is the Minnesota Vikings. And you're talking about Indianapolis. I like the idea of drafting Indianapolis early, and then once their schedule maybe heats up, start watching Minnesota, because I think Minnesota, they lost so many people, and I think they had a great draft. I think they reloaded the talent. We talk about programs. Zimmer's a good defensive head coach. They're going to have talent there, but I think it's going to take 8 weeks to gel. And so I'm looking at Minnesota. I think they're a team that when you're making your playoff run, kind of similar to Kansas City last year, honestly, and you're looking for I need to shore up my defense, I need to get some points. I think Minnesota could be that back half. And when you pair them up against a front half darling like an Indianapolis could be, I mean, you could have a season long, if you take, your point spread, you could have a season long top 3 defense if you take those 2 teams together at their strength. What do you think about that argument?
See, I'm just not seeing it. I'm looking at the schedule here in the second half of the year. Starting week 8, Green Bay, Detroit, those I think are 2 good offenses. Chicago, they suck. Dallas, Carolina, those are 2 really good offenses, I think. Jacksonville, I don't think they're going to be as bad as people think, but that's a projected good matchup. Then you talk about the playoffs. They faced the Buccaneers the first week of the playoffs. Bears, week 2. Bears, week 2, that's great. Then they faced the Saints in the week 16 championship. So there's going to be a few games in between if you need to win week 13 against Jacksonville and you need to win second week of the playoffs against Chicago. Those are good matchups, but you're going to need to pair that defense with another defense if you're going to be relying on them in the second half of the year, because against Tampa Bay and against New Orleans, those 2 playoff weeks, that is not a good matchup.
Let's talk about 2 NFC teams that you also mentioned in your poll. I mentioned Washington, and Philadelphia is another one. I'm surprised that they got as many votes as they did, because they lost. It's kind of a turnover year for them. They lost some roster. They had to make some waivings or whatever, cut some players. So I like this team. They always play with speed, and I think, again, the offense, like you're talking about, kind of the offensive uplift by just staying on the field and keeping your defense fresh. I think that'll be interesting for Philly, but I'm not an investor on them in the draft. But Washington is interesting because you get basically Ron Rivera, Jack Del Rio. They always have top 10 defenses. Most of the time, the 2 of them had top 5 defenses. Put them together, Washington has a really good defensive line, which we saw.
All first-round picks, I believe. Every single player starting on their D-line is a first-rounder.
Very similar to what San Francisco has done. I'm not going to say they're going to reproduce, but if you believe the draft hype, you could plug in Chase Young just like San Francisco plugged in Nick Bosa last year and change the whole dynamic of them. Now, I think they're weak in the secondary, weaker certainly than San Francisco. And I think they're a little bit slower at running back than you want. This is something, again, as somebody who kind of grew up watching this team and following them, Washington was doing the opposite of what everybody else was they were drafting defensive linemen and moving them to linebacker, which makes you a liability in pass coverage. I think what you want to do is draft your safeties, your bigger safeties, your slower safeties, move them up as a rangy linebacker that can go into coverage. Washington's been doing the opposite of that for years. It's been driving me crazy. But those are my questions. I think Washington might be a year away, but I do think they will surprise some people. With that coaching staff, and I know Rivera might have to step away. Unfortunately, he was diagnosed with cancer and all that, so that really sucks. But even if he steps away, Jack Del Rio is going to be the coach there and the play caller. I don't think they're any lower, even as bad as this team can be. I don't think they're any lower as a defensive unit than 15. Which means they could be a stream play for you week to week.
That's fair, especially because I really like that San Fran connection you made. They built that team through the defensive line. Mm-hmm. Like, it was about winning in the trenches, getting to the quarterback, and just making it easy for the back half of their defense. Their front half made it easy for their back half. That's as simple as it was last year. And 2 years ago, they didn't have that front half pressure, and they weren't a good defense. So you talk about if Washington can provide pressure up front, they can stop the run, they can win in the trenches, they do have a shot at being a team that can provide streaming value, especially because you talk about their philosophy offensively. I don't know how much they're going to want to pass the ball. We'll see. There's going to be weeks where they're probably going to try and win ugly. They're probably not going to ask that offense to do a whole lot. So there are going to be weeks where I think Washington does perform well. I would probably rather take a chance on the Eagles, just because you talk about the Eagles last year. Their defense and Washington's defense was both bad. Philadelphia at least ranked 15th. Washington ranked 25th as a defense. Philadelphia had nothing going on in their secondary last year. Like, everybody was hurt.
Yep.
I forget. I can't even remember some of the names of the
Darby,
players.
I think, was there. Am I right?
And he was hurt too, I believe.
Yeah.
This year they bring in Darius Slay, big play Slay. They have that scheme you kind of talk about Baltimore. They don't have to have necessarily the players in place to get those sacks. They're going to send some heat. They're going to blitz at a high rate.
Yep.
They're probably going to create turnovers. So I think I'd rather take a chance on Philadelphia than Washington. But again, I'm probably not high on either of those two defenses. So I would be expecting to stream at that point if I'm into that territory.
Absolutely. By the way, Washington Bavada has it plus 15,000 to win the Super Bowl. Philadelphia at plus 2,200.
Who's the least likely to win according to them?
I think it might be Jacksonville. Hold on, let me look. I think it's Jacksonville at plus 20.
Everybody's got Jacksonville as the worst team this year, man. I mean, that's.
I don't think they're. I'm going to go on record. I don't think they're the worst team this year.
Oh, me too. I don't think so either.
I
don't even think they'll be a top 3 worst team. I think they're going to win 6 to 7 games, and there will be a couple teams who were in that 4 to 5 game area.
Yeah, it's. I think maybe certainly with COVID and lack of offense, I don't think that we're going to see like that bad 1-15 team this season. I think the first pick in the draft very well might be like a 4-12. Or a 5-11. I don't think it'll be 5-11.
Whichever team loses their quarterback.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. Yeah, it is Jacksonville, and then we have a handful of teams for the tie for second place in terms of worst Super Bowl odds would be Carolina at plus 15,000, Cincinnati at plus 15,000, Washington at plus 15,000. So there you go. Let's see. Let's swing it. So I'm going to open this up because I know you're going to have two teams. But since we're just talking about Philadelphia and you're talking about scheme and blitz and yada, yada, I'm going to throw another team out there, not necessarily on my draftable radar, but a defensive coordinator that always has fantasy relevant teams, at least in a stream format, regardless of talent, because of his scheme. Greg Williams, New York Jets. I don't love the transactions. I don't love getting rid of the talent that they got rid of over the last couple of years. I think that has to do, really honestly, more with the coaches just being so toxic that they can't get along with people. That's bad. You don't want that as an organization. You want teamwork and camaraderie. You don't want like coaches getting rid of Pro Bowlers because they can't make it work. But honestly though, if you take all that aside, especially if you're a daily fantasy player and you're looking for some value play, I mean, you're going to get sacks and you're going to get turnovers. And they play in a division that might sometimes struggle to get points as well. Buffalo's not lighting up the score sheet week to week. New England, still a little bit of an unknown entity. Miami, Fitzpatrick, man, he might throw up 35 points or he might throw up 35 interceptions week to week. So I like the division. What do you think about the Jets?
It's funny because I was looking at the rankings from last year as you were talking a little bit, and that was the name that stood out to me from last year's top 10. And I'm saying, okay, who are the crappy teams who actually had good fantasy defenses last year?
Yeah.
And you look at the Jets, they were the number seven defense last year. What? And that was being a terrible team. Their defense wasn't very good either.
And people hate them.
Can it be worse? Can it be worse than last year? I mean, they're getting Mosley, but they lost Adams, but they're getting Mosley back. They're having another year offensively to kind of come together. Maybe they're not playing from behind as much. I
think Mosley might have opted out. I could be wrong on this, but I think Mosley might have opted out.
Oh, did he? Okay.
I for some reason that name's sticking out.
Now that you say that, it is ringing a little bit of a bell. I feel like you might be right about that. But still, you're talking about the number 7 defense from last year. They didn't have Mosley last year.
Yeah, exactly.
So
can you go back? I know you're looking at Fantasy Pros. Can you go back to 2018? Is that an easy drop down for you? Because I'd be curious where the Browns ranked in 2018.
Are they one of your sleepers for this year? I do think Browns, they had some hype last year going into last year.
Yeah, but they lost. I want to see what Williams did with the Browns that one year.
They were 20th.
Oh, they were 20th that year?
In 2018.
Okay, never mind. Because Greg Williams, obviously he was a coach, the defensive coordinator for the Browns after that whole time when they had that interim coach with Freddie Kitchens, prior to him getting the hit. Anyway. So, but Greg Williams, man, he always does good things, and Schwartz came from that school of Greg Williams. They run very similar schemes, which is why I had that Philly connection. I'm going to throw one more defense at you, and then I'm going to let you kind of start throwing some defenses at me. You mentioned them in your poll. I think they're too high for this year, but it's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I worry about them. Again, offensive impact, here's my thing. Are they going to be as bad as last year? No, they're going to be better. I like Todd Bowles as a coach. They get some talent. I get it. I understand it. But I think this offense is going to be scoring too much. It's almost like the Indianapolis Colts with Peyton Manning factor. I think this offense is going to be otherworldly this year. I think they're going to be so good. And I think the defense is going to be giving up points as a result of that. So I'm a seller on Tampa Bay. What are your thoughts on them?
I think I kind of land on the other side.
Yeah.
And we talked about Tampa Bay when I talked about that poll. They were the number 1 team in votes gotten. They got 18 votes out of 130. So they're definitely the people's sleeper defense of the year. What I like about Tampa Bay is that they did something really, 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 really well. And it's not necessarily something that you want. They stopped the run. You'd rather them stop the pass in today's age. But they were the number 1 rushing defense last year. And not just number one by over 200 yards. They allowed 1,181. I believe second place was 1,391.
Right.
They allowed only 3.3 yards per carry. And I don't know if you remember this last year. They were so good against running backs that after they shut down McCaffrey the first time, we were considering sitting McCaffrey. There was a large portion of fantasy players who were considering sitting Christian McCaffrey last year in the midst of his crazy season, just because it was against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let me just interject quickly. That's a classic to me overthinking situation. I understand matchup play, but when you're talking about McCaffrey, I tell people, you draft your stars to be stars. Like one bad game, I get it. You can't You can't bench the guy. Do you want to be the person that benches like McCaffrey in the playoffs? I know it wasn't the playoffs, but like benches him in the playoffs because you're worried about.
It wasn't actually a terrible call. I do agree. He should have been in the lineup no matter what.
Yeah.
But you look when he played them in week 2.
Yeah.
He had 7 fantasy points. He had 16 rushes for 37 yards, 2 receptions, and 16 yards. It was definitely a question mark. Should I be playing him against Tampa Bay? And that was at home. The second time they played him was away on the road.
Yeah.
And he did score 21 points in the second matchup, but he had 22 carries for 31 yards.
Yeah.
4 receptions, 26 yards. He got in the end zone twice. That's what saved his day. But they were shutting down running backs last year. Other side of the coin, they were getting passed all over on. They had the 3rd worst pass defense in terms of yards, which again is that concern you're talking about, especially if they're winning more games and that game script is where they're playing from ahead and teams need to pass on them. It's not exactly a great matchup being bad against the pass and having teams pass on you more. But they were 7th most in sacks, all right? So they were getting to the quarterback. They had that good – it kind of reiterates they're good in the front 7. It was that back half of the defense that struggled. Their starting cornerbacks were Carlton Davis, who was a second-year pro, and Sean Murphy Bunting, who was a rookie. That's very troublesome, and you should expect at least a little bit of growth, I think, this year from those 2 cornerbacks going into year 2 and year 3. Another thing, they solidified their safety help with drafting Antoine Winfield Jr., who some of you guys might know that name, Antoine Winfield, Pro Bowl cornerback who played, I believe it was like 10 seasons with the Vikings and Bills.
Right.
He was good. I'm always attracted to players who have that NFL bloodline and have the alumni in their family. Every little bit I've been seeing from Antoine Winfield, I've been reading a few of the Pewter reports from the Buccaneers. Yeah. He's been getting rave reviews, Antoine Winfield, as a safety for that team. They are expecting him to come in as a rookie, make plays immediately. And if he can help shore up that secondary, they can stop the run, they can get sacks. We'll talk about Tom Brady. I think Tom Brady's going to help the defense, not just on the field. I think we've getting lost in Tom Brady. We're talking about is he going to throw to Evans? Is he going to throw to Godwin? How many touchdowns is Brock going to score? Which running back's going to catch passes? Nobody's talking about the effect he's going to have on this locker room. You're playing with Jameis Winston as a defensive player. Sure, maybe you're motivated to go out and win. You bring Tom Brady into that equation, it's going to have ripple effects throughout the entire locker room on the defensive side as well. I think you're going to see players elevate their game, elevate their work ethic, and I think it's just going to ripple through the entire locker room. And I think I'm with the people. I think Tampa Bay is in a great position to rack up sacks, potentially get a few turnovers, and stop the run. So I think they're a great sleeper defense this year. The only problem is you kind of look at that division, facing the Saints twice, facing the Falcons twice, facing the Panthers twice. There's going to be 6 matchups you're not very happy putting them in your lineup. But there should be other matchups where they could really have that blow-up potential to possibly win you a week as a defense.
So one little note on the Brady factor, too, on top of the locker room is, you're probably going to have 25 less interceptions this year. And so think about how many times
25 to 30.
Yeah, right. How many times the Buccaneers flipped the field and the defense was starting on their own 30-yard line, Seriously, I mean, that's going to have a major impact on the total scoring, which is going to have an impact on the fantasy score as well. I'm going to save – I have one more team I want to talk about. I'm going to save that for the end. Do you have anybody that we haven't talked about? You might even bring up my team here. Anybody we haven't talked about that we should be thinking about right now, David?
I think there's one more team that I wanted to bring up, and they were coincidentally the second most vote getters in my poll. So let me say this. I'm not just catering to my Twitter follows. I actually agree. I agree with you guys. I think Tampa Bay and I think the Chargers. I think they had a lot of hype last year coming in. Kind of you talk about the Cleveland Browns. We were expecting them to take that leap defensively last year. It didn't happen. Joey Bosa had his injuries. Derwin James had his injuries. Talk about Melvin Ingram. He had his injuries. Every year I feel like I'm saying this, they're healthy now. They're healthy now. Maybe this could be the year. They have those playmakers at all 3 levels. Yeah. Talk about the defensive line. Joey Bosa, I think they just made him the highest paid defensive player in the league. Melvin Ingram, they have a second guy who can get after the quarterback as a linebacker. Then you talk about that secondary. Derwin James, who I love and who I was just absolutely torn apart when my Baltimore Ravens passed on him in the draft. I wanted it so bad. They traded back twice. Derwin James and Calvin Ridley both on the board, who I wanted both of them. Took Hayden Hurst. Come on. At least they fixed it with the Lamar Jackson pick. But anyways, Derwin James, great player. You talk about the cornerbacks. They already have Casey Hayward in place. They already have Desmond King, who's a great slot cornerback. Then you bring in Chris Harris into the fold. They have 4 now great defensive backs on top. It's a passing league. You talk about the division. They have Kansas City they have to face twice. That's not good. But are the Raiders and the Broncos offense going to be great this year? I don't know. They might be at least at worst average matchups. So I think they have a solid division. I think they have all the playmakers in place. And offensively, I don't think they're going to pass as much as they were last year. So again, it goes back to they could be holding the ball a little bit longer. Yep. We'll see. I think they're a great sleeper defense. I'd probably take Tampa Bay ahead of them, but after that, they're probably my second sleeper defense off the board.
And the Chargers, Bovada has at plus 3,000 to win. They're a team that when I was looking at different teams and everything, they're kind of on my radar. I'm going to throw one more at you because I was high on them last year, and I feel like first of all, it was a little bit early, obviously a little bit early on them because I whiffed on it. No argument there. I mean, it was kind of a whiff, but they had super key injuries early in the year, new defensive system, bad offense for most of the year.
You're going to say Denver.
I am.
I knew it.
I am. Denver, man. I was
thinking the same thing.
Look, man, like I mentioned Chicago, losing Fangio. Fangio's had elite defenses everywhere he's been, okay? I think, and it's kind of similar, I guess, to me of what Lynn has done in the Chargers. You get a lifelong defensive guy, you know you're going to have defensive juice. What concerns me about Denver and any defensive coordinator that gets jobs is, are you the type of defensive coordinator that wants to win games, 6-3 or maybe 3-2 or something like that, right? Or 4-3. Do the defensive coordinators want to ignore offense because they're so ego-driven that they think they can shut everybody out? To me, like with the hires that he's made at offensive coordinator, he looks like he's trying to get an aggressive offensive system. They were just bad last year. I don't think that he's a ground and pound, 3 yards in a cloud of dust on offense. Let me punt and play field position. I do think he wants to be aggressive. And by the way, the teams that he's been defensive coordinator of, they've always tried to be aggressive too. They get Bradley Chubb back, who everybody was saying, hey, and the camp buzz before Chubb got injured last year was he's going to be the Khalil Mack of this defense. I thought it was going to be Von Miller coming in. They said, no, it's going to be Bradley Chubb's going to be the guy. Well, now you have Chubb and Von Miller there. I believe Wolf ended up opting out too, so I was happy that they were going to get him back. But bottom line is you have another offseason. The players have a year of familiarity. I do think the offense will be better, although I still have question marks about sophomore slump, what's going to happen with Drew Lock with the full season. Denver is a team, they're going to go undrafted. I would watch list them because I think they'll get to the quarterback, and maybe next year they're going to be a top 10 surprise defense. They might be a year away this year, but if you tell me at the end of the season they finish like number 7 in defense, it would not shock me at all.
See, I like Denver too, and I was looking at them as well, and you dropped the Fangio name on, so I kind of had a feeling you were coming back to them. But you talk about Bradley Chubb as a rookie. He had 12 sacks. He was, I believe, top 5 pick. Yeah. He had 12 sacks as a rookie. Last year, he got hurt after 4 games. Mm-hmm. So he was just not playing. That's right. A major, maybe their best pass rusher, better than Vaughn.
That's what the buzz was last year, was that he was the best pass rusher coming in for sure, by a wide margin.
Yeah, you talk about Wolf. They lost. He went to Baltimore. He didn't opt out. He signed with Baltimore. Okay. And they lost Harris, but they did bring in Jarrell Casey, who I believe they traded a 5th or 6th round pick for from Titans. He's not a sexy name. No defensive tackle is, other than Aaron Donald maybe. But Jarrell Casey's been a great player. He's been a Pro Bowl defensive lineman. He's going to allow Von Miller and Chubb to see more of that single blocker. Yes. They're not going to get as many doubles with Jarrell Casey there. They still have playmakers on the second level. Justin Simmons is a great safety. And then, again, it comes back to that coordinator. Or is their coordinator going to put them in a good position to succeed? I think Fangio has shown throughout his coaching history he's going to do that. The offenses should improve this year, possibly drastically. So, again, Denver, I think that's a very good sleeper defense. Yep.
And I can't remember if I responded to your Twitter poll or not, but I remember when I saw that I thought Denver, but I was probably updating the
I think you might have.
Yeah, like I like Denver a lot just because
they got 7 votes.
Oh, okay. Hey, so I'm not the only one then. Very good. I think that's about it. Any other defenses that you're thinking of?
I think that's about it, man.
I think we talked about 20 of them.
Yeah, I think maybe Green Bay and Dallas. I'm kind of keeping my eye on those defenses just because Green Bay added a lot of players to their defense last year. Talk about the two Smiths, Za'Darius, who, again, former Raven. Love him. So love the crap out of that guy. I think he's a great player. I thought he always was a great player. Preston Smith on the other side. They get to face Chicago twice a year. We don't know if Matt Stafford's going to be super healthy. He's had back issues 2 years in a row. Talk about the Vikings. They're pretty conservative on offense. So I don't think the division's going to hurt them with the matchups too bad. They want to run the ball. They want to control the clock. I think that's good. You talk about Dallas. They have that defensive line. They brought in Everson Griffin. They just lost McCoy to the injury, but they have a great defensive line, two great linebackers. Secondary is the question mark. But if they can get even average play out of their secondary, I think, again, they're in a great place to be playing from ahead a little bit more, racking up some of those sack totals. So I think those are two defenses that I think are definitely going to have some streaming potential at this year. I don't know if I'm drafting either.
Yeah, right.
But I'm keeping my eye on both.
Yeah, watch list and stream. Well, I think we can call that an episode, man. Maybe next week, I mean, we can talk a little bit more about draft scenarios because I think we've worked our way now through all the positions. And then we'll pretty much be prepping for the season after that. So it's coming, man. It's coming.
You don't want to do a full kicker breakdown?
No. I'm done. My kicker breakdown is Tucker and Butker, and then it doesn't matter. That's it. That's it for me. All right, everybody. Hey, on that note, hey, I know it's draft season, guys. Nail those drafts. You can pick up the Fantasy Football Almanac. Check the links below. Obviously, follow us on Twitter. Guru Fantasy World. Check out David's site. You can check out mine as well, but David's is more updated than mine, just to be completely transparent there. So there you go. I'm in book mode, man. It's all about updating the book and answering emails these days. So thanks for listening. Oh, give us that 5-star review, everybody. We need that, and write a little comment in as well. We appreciate that. Have a great week. Talk to you then.